It was a chilly evening in early spring when the call came through, a frantic whisper over the phone, laced with a mix of fear and urgency, was enough to send a ripple of unease through the animal rights organization. Someone, hiding in the shadows, had gathered the courage to speak out. They described a hidden dog meat farm, tucked away in the rural corners of South Korea, where hundreds of dogs were being held in cruel conditions. The whistleblower, terrified of being caught, had given only vague details, but their message was clear. Lives were at stake, and the situation was dire. Within hours, the organization sprung into action, calling together a small team of experts and volunteers, including one of their most trusted and trained K9 rescue dogs, Max. Max wasn't just any dog. He was a German shepherd with years of experience in search and rescue operations. His incredible nose had already saved countless lives in the past, finding missing persons in dense forests or trapped beneath rubble after natural disasters. Now, he was about to face his most intense mission yet. The rescue team didn't waste time. They packed their gear and boarded a flight to South Korea, knowing the risks involved in confronting a hidden operation that could have violent consequences. The location was remote, tucked away in a desolate farming district. The information they had was sparse, and the team couldn't be sure what they'd be walking into. What they did know was this: time was running out for those 450 dogs, and they had no intention of failing them. When the team arrived, the moon hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows over the barren fields surrounding the farm. The air was thick with a musty scent, and there was an eerie silence that seemed to cling to everything. Max, calm yet alert, was immediately let loose from his harness. His handler, Tom, a seasoned rescuer with an unwavering sense of responsibility, gave Max a reassuring pat on the head before speaking softly, "Find them, boy." Max's powerful legs moved with purpose, his nose twitching as he began to scan the air. The farm, which had been designed to keep outsiders away, felt like a labyrinth, cages stacked on top of one another, some rusted and others barely holding together. The team's flashlights flickered across the darkness as they moved forward, but it was Max who guided them through the maze. The further they ventured, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. The ground was soft beneath their feet, caked with mud and grime. In the distance, a faint barking could be heard, but it was muffled by the sheer volume of cages. Max's movements became more precise, as if he knew there was something important just ahead. His nose twitched, and he suddenly veered off the path, heading toward a hidden corner behind a dilapidated barn. Tom's heart raced. There was something in the air. Something was about to happen. Max had found a trail. The sound of hurried breathing filled the night as Tom and his team followed. They stumbled upon a makeshift shed tucked away in a remote corner of the farm. This was it. Max barked once and stood still, ears alert, his gaze fixed on the shed. Tom's pulse quickened, but the team was prepared. They braced themselves for what they might find behind that door. Opening it was like unleashing a nightmare. The sight that met their eyes was nothing short of horrific, but they had to continue. There was no turning back now. The real work was just beginning. The door creaked open with a haunting, drawn-out sound, as if the very walls of the shed were reluctant to reveal the horrors it contained. Tom's heart hammered in his chest as he swept his flashlight across the room. The beam of light hit the first cage, and his breath caught. Inside was a small dog, its eyes wide with fear, its ribs clearly visible beneath its matted fur. It barely moved, too weak and traumatized to react. The room was filled with the sound of shuffling and soft whimpers, but there was a strange, suffocating silence about the place. The dim light revealed row upon row of filthy, overcrowded cages, each one holding a dog in various stages of neglect and despair. The air was thick with the stench of urine and decay, and the ground was coated in muck. Max, however, did not hesitate. Without a moment's pause, Max trotted forward, his nose leading him through the chaotic mess of cages. His focus was unwavering. Every step he took was precise, his instincts finely tuned to detect even the smallest change in the air. As he moved through the shed, his handlers kept a close eye on him, following his every cue. Tom knew that Max was the key to saving these dogs. The K9 had been trained for high-pressure situations, but this was different. This wasn't a missing person or a disaster zone. This was a place of unimaginable cruelty, and Max had a unique understanding of what needed to be done. Max's ears perked up as he made his way through the rows. He stopped in front of a cage tucked in the farthest corner, where the scent of fear was overwhelming. The dogs in the surrounding cages seemed to cower even more at the presence of the K9, their eyes wide with confusion and dread. But Max wasn't deterred. He stood still, his gaze fixed on the cage before him. Tom's voice trembled slightly as he whispered, "What is it, boy?" Max's body language was clear. This was one of the most critical finds. The handler's breath quickened as he stepped closer, carefully placing his hand on Max's back. "Let's check it out." With a swift motion, Tom unlocked the cage and pulled it open. Inside was a trembling dog, barely able to stand. Its fur was matted and wet, its eyes swollen from infection, and its body covered in sores. It was a shadow of the animal it had once been, weak, malnourished, and utterly broken. Yet, as Tom crouched down and gently extended his hand, the dog looked up at him with a flicker of recognition, as if it understood that someone was there to help. "Hang in there, buddy," Tom murmured softly, his voice full of compassion. He reached into his bag and produced a small bottle of water, offering it to the dog. Slowly, the animal's parched lips parted, and it drank greedily. Max sat beside them, his head tilted slightly as if watching over the dog, as if ensuring its safety. But the work wasn't done. They couldn't afford to linger. There were still hundreds of other dogs in the shed, each one waiting for their chance to be saved. Tom stood up, his movements deliberate, and careful not to startle the other dogs. He motioned for the team to move forward, and Max immediately took the lead once again, his nose guiding them to the next cage, the next life in need of rescue. As the team moved deeper into the shed, the emotional weight of what they were witnessing began to sink in. The dogs had been confined to these cages for so long, their bodies frail and covered in wounds. Many of them had given up hope, resigned to their fate, while others trembled in fear. But Max's unrelenting drive pushed the team forward. He refused to stop, his determination becoming contagious to those around him. The handler's pace quickened, each person knowing that they couldn't waste another moment. Max led them through the shed, his every action proving just how invaluable he was. He was the bridge between the horrors of this place and the possibility of salvation. With every dog rescued, there was a fleeting sense of victory, but the team knew it was just the beginning. The rescue was only half of the battle. The real fight would be getting these dogs to safety, where they could be healed, both physically and emotionally. But for now, the mission was clear. Rescue as many dogs as possible, and get them out of this nightmare. Max had led them into the darkness, and now it was up to them to bring the light of hope. The team moved with newfound urgency, knowing that every second mattered. As Max continued to guide the team deeper into the shed, the magnitude of the rescue began to unfold before their eyes. The flashlight beams cut through the darkness, revealing more and more cages, stacked high, each one containing a dog, some too weak to stand, others pacing nervously, eyes wide with terror. The smell was overpowering, a stench of neglect and despair that seemed to permeate every inch of the air. The dogs had been confined here for so long, they seemed to have lost their sense of trust, their spirits broken. Max's focus never wavered, his movements purposeful as he led the way. The handler, Tom, felt a sense of awe mixed with sorrow as he watched the dog work. Max had been through countless rescue operations, but this one felt different. The scale of it was beyond anything they had prepared for. He couldn't help but wonder just how many animals were trapped in this hellish place. The team moved through the rows of cages, but with each passing moment, The reality of the operation's enormity hit harder. Each cage seemed to hold more than just a dog. It held a story, a life, a heartbreaking existence of suffering. There were dogs of all sizes and breeds, some with broken limbs, others with severe malnourishment, and a few that were so traumatized they barely acknowledged the team's presence. The sheer number of animals was staggering. Max had led them to an isolated corner of the shed where the cages seemed to stretch endlessly in rows, as far as the eye could see. Tom counted quickly in his head. Hundreds of dogs, maybe more, all trapped in their own little prison. It wasn't until Max stopped in front of one particular cage, his body tense with focus, that the true scope of the farm's operation became evident. Tom approached cautiously, his heart sinking. He squatted down and unlocked the cage with trembling hands. Inside was an elderly dog, its fur patchy and graying. It had no strength left to stand, its eyes dull, filled with a deep sadness that struck Tom's core. The dog barely reacted when Tom reached out to touch it, its body cold and unresponsive. But as he gently lifted the dog into his arms, there was a flicker of recognition, an acknowledgement that someone was finally offering help. "This one's had enough," Tom muttered under his breath, his voice thick with emotion. Max sat beside them, his gaze soft but intent. The K9 had already moved on, leading the team to another cage, but Tom could see the subtle shift in the dog's posture. Max knew that every life mattered, no matter how small or broken. There was no hesitation in the K9's movements as he continued to search for more. The team worked quickly, but efficiently, to free each dog Max guided them to. As they moved through the shed, it became clear that these dogs had been bred and raised for a horrifying purpose, to be slaughtered for meat. Some of the dogs bore the telltale signs of abuse, their bodies scarred from rough handling, or from being shoved into cages that were too small. Others showed signs of malnutrition, their ribs visible under their patchy fur. And then there were those whose eyes told the saddest story: utter resignation, as if they had already accepted their fate. But still, they fought for survival. The will to live burned within each of them, and Max was there to give them a fighting chance. The team was starting to realize the true scale of their mission. This wasn't just a few dozen dogs in need of rescue. This was an entire operation, an unimaginable scale of suffering. It was no longer just about getting in and out quickly. It was about saving every life, no matter the cost. Max led them to the center of the shed, where they discovered even more cages, each containing a dog desperately clawing at the bars, trying to escape. Tom's voice cracked as he spoke to his team. "We can't leave any behind. We have to get them all out." The realization hit hard. The 450 dogs were just the beginning. There was still so much more to do, so much more to uncover. But with Max by their side, guiding them through the darkness, they knew there was hope. The first stage of their mission had been a success, but the hardest part was still to come. Now they had to ensure that every dog, every single one, had a chance to experience a life beyond the bars of this nightmare, and it was up to them to make that a reality. The pace of the rescue quickened as Max led the team through the maze of cages. Each new cage, each new dog, felt like another emotional blow, yet it also fueled their determination. The mission had evolved into something larger than they had anticipated. It wasn't just about saving lives. It was about making sure that every dog, no matter how broken, was given a chance to recover, to live, to be loved. Max's incredible skill and unwavering focus became even more apparent as they pressed on. The K9 was methodical in his approach, his nose twitching in the air as he identified the most vulnerable dogs. There were moments when Max seemed to pause, his ears perked up, his eyes scanning the dark corners of the shed before he would dart to another cage, his instincts telling him which dogs needed help the most. The team followed his lead, knowing that Max was far more than just a tool. He was the heart of the rescue effort. It wasn't easy. The shed was a nightmare of filth and neglect. The team's hands shook from the stench of urine and decay, their hearts heavy with the weight of what they were witnessing. But they had no time to dwell on the horror. There were lives to save. One of the dogs Max led them to was an emaciated pit bull, its ribs clearly visible under its thin coat. The dog was crouched at the back of the cage, trembling, its eyes darting in terror. It had been starved and abused, its body covered in scars, yet there was something in its eyes, a flicker of hope. Max stood at the edge of the cage, barking once, then looking back at Tom with an intensity that was almost pleading. Tom crouched down in front of the dog, his voice soft and reassuring. "It's okay, buddy. We're here to help." The pit bull flinched as Tom reached out, but after a moment of hesitation, it took a tentative step toward him. With a gentle hand, Tom unlocked the cage and carefully pulled the dog into his arms. The dog was light, fragile, but there was a palpable strength within it. This dog, like all the others, was a survivor. Max stood at attention, watching as Tom cradled the dog and gently patted its head, offering comfort. The bond between handler and K9 was unspoken, but it was clear in that moment that they were working as one. Max had led them here, and now it was up to the team to provide the care that the dog so desperately needed. "Let's keep going," Tom said, his voice tight with emotion. "We're not done yet." They moved through the shed, each step more urgent than the last. Max continued to lead the way, his focus unshakable. The team worked in synchronized silence, rescuing dog after dog, each one a new challenge, a new life to save. Some dogs were too frightened to trust humans, cowering in the back of their cages, while others rushed forward, wagging their tails despite their fear. There was a heartbreaking beauty in their resilience, in the fact that so many of them still held on to the belief that kindness existed somewhere, even after all they had endured. As the night wore on, the team made their way through the vast shed, rescuing dogs, checking their health, and taking note of their injuries. Some of the dogs needed immediate medical attention, cuts and bruises, infections, malnutrition. Others needed to be slowly coaxed into trusting the humans around them. Max played a vital role in calming the more anxious dogs, standing by their cages and providing a sense of reassurance with his presence. His gentle nature and reassuring demeanor helped more than the team could have imagined. He was a living testament to the strength of the bond between humans and animals, a beacon of hope in an otherwise bleak and desperate place. Max's work wasn't done, though. He was tireless, his energy seemingly endless, even as the hours passed. The team took shifts, but Max continued his diligent search, his nose never stopping. It was as if he understood that the stakes were higher than ever, that every dog they found was another victory in the battle to end the suffering. Finally, after hours of intense work, the team reached the farthest corner of the shed, where the last few cages were hidden. It was here that they discovered the most heart-wrenching scene yet. A group of puppies, no more than a few months old, curled together for warmth. Their tiny bodies were so frail, their eyes barely open, yet they were alive, clinging to one another in a desperate attempt to survive. Max barked sharply, alerting the team to their presence. Tom knelt beside the puppies, his heart breaking as he gently gathered them into his arms. "These little ones," Tom said softly, "we won't leave them behind." As they prepared to leave the shed, the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on them. The work was far from over, and the road ahead would be long. But in this moment, there was a deep sense of accomplishment. They had saved lives, real, living beings who now had a chance at something better. And at the center of it all was Max, the K9 who had led them through the darkness and into the light. Max had proven himself not just as a rescue dog, but as a symbol of hope, courage, and the unbreakable will to survive. The next phase of the rescue operation was just as critical as the first, getting the 450 dogs out of the horrific conditions and into safety. The team had managed to free as many as they could from the shed, but the night was far from over. The trucks had arrived, ready to transport the dogs to a temporary shelter set up for their recovery. But the journey ahead was still fraught with challenges. Max, who had been tirelessly guiding the rescue effort, was given a moment's rest as the team began organizing the dogs for transport. He lay down on the grass outside the shed, his body still alert, eyes scanning every movement around him. Despite the exhaustion evident in his muscles, he never let his guard down. It was as if he knew the fight wasn't over yet, that there was more to be done. The rescued dogs were lined up in rows, many of them too weak to walk, others too frightened to move. Some were so malnourished they could barely stand, while others had deep wounds that required immediate attention. As Tom and the rest of the team worked swiftly, their hands moving with purpose and precision, Max stood nearby, watching over them. His role was far from finished. He would be there to offer comfort and reassurance, guiding the frightened animals with his steady presence. The first of the dogs were loaded into the trucks, their transport made as comfortable as possible under the circumstances. The puppies, still trembling with fear and uncertainty, were placed in carriers with soft bedding, their fragile bodies gently cradled by the team. Tom gave each of the dogs a final look, his heart aching for all they had endured. They were out of the shed, out of the horror, but the battle was not won. The dogs were not yet free. They had only just begun their journey to healing. The convoy of trucks rumbled away from the farm, the dogs on board their first ride toward safety. Max, now back in the front of the pack, was ready for the next leg of the operation. He'd been part of many rescues, but there was something different about this one. These dogs had suffered immensely, and their journey to recovery would take time. But Max was determined to make sure they would find that recovery, no matter the cost. As the trucks sped toward the shelter, the team's focus shifted from the immediate chaos of the rescue to the long-term care these dogs would need. Tom knew that the physical injuries were only part of the battle. Many of the dogs had been so traumatized by their experiences that they were unable to trust humans at all. Healing from that kind of psychological damage would be far more difficult. Max, with his calm and unassuming nature, was already helping in that regard. Even though he had witnessed unimaginable cruelty, his presence was a reminder that not all humans, and certainly not all dogs, were capable of such cruelty. The shelter was waiting when they arrived, an industrial building converted into a temporary sanctuary. It was sterile and clinical in appearance, but it was a world away from the nightmare the dogs had just escaped. The team moved quickly, unloading the dogs and ensuring each one was placed in a comfortable, secure space. Vets and animal care specialists were already on hand, ready to begin assessing and treating the animals. Max, despite his own exhaustion, stood watch over the first group of rescued dogs as they were given water and food. Some of the dogs hesitated, unsure of their new surroundings, but Max's quiet, steady demeanor provided a sense of calm. One of the first dogs to approach Max was the elderly pit bull they had rescued earlier. It hobbled slowly over to him, its eyes brightening as it recognized the comfort that Max brought. The pit bull's tail wagged slightly, and it gave a soft whine, its way of expressing gratitude. Max, ever the protector, lowered his head, allowing the dog to sniff him, offering reassurance in the way only a dog could. This moment, a simple exchange of trust and kindness, was a testament to how far the dogs had come, even in such a short time. Over the next few hours, the shelter became a flurry of activity. Medical staff worked diligently to address the dogs' injuries, administering fluids to the dehydrated, cleaning wounds, and feeding those too weak to eat on their own. But amidst the chaos, there were moments of pure joy. The dogs, many of them for the first time in their lives, were experiencing kindness, safety, and compassion. They were learning to trust again, one step at a time. Max was everywhere. He had an uncanny ability to sense which dogs needed the most attention. He would approach the ones that were too frightened to move, sitting beside them and offering his silent comfort. His presence was a balm for their trauma. With every dog that slowly warmed up to human touch, with every hesitant tail wag or soft nudge, it became clear the recovery had begun. For Max, there was no time to rest. Even when the shelter staff offered him food and water, he was always on the move, guiding the other animals, providing strength when it was most needed. His job wasn't finished until every last dog had received the care they so desperately needed, and until they were finally given a second chance at life. In the weeks to come, the road to recovery would be long and challenging, but Max had led them through the darkest part of the journey. And now, with the dogs safe and under medical care, they had a fighting chance, thanks to a heroic K9 who refused to leave any behind. As the days passed in the shelter, the initial chaos of the rescue operation settled into a routine. The dogs were no longer confined to their cages, but rather given spaces to roam, explore, and, most importantly, heal. For some, the transition was smoother than others. The physical wounds were relatively straightforward to treat. Broken bones, infected cuts, and severe malnutrition could be addressed with proper care and nutrition. But the emotional scars left by the horrors they had endured would take longer to heal. Max, though exhausted from the intensity of the rescue, remained a constant presence in the shelter. His role was far from over. With every new dog that arrived at the shelter, Max was there, standing by their side, offering quiet comfort. His gentle nature had an extraordinary effect on the dogs, many of whom were too scared to trust humans. They would watch him from a distance, cautious and uncertain, but slowly they began to take cues from Max's calm demeanor. The first signs of healing came when the dogs started to show interest in their surroundings. At first, they huddled together in the corners of their pens, too frightened to venture far. But Max's quiet, patient presence acted as a bridge between the past and their future. He would wander through the shelter, pausing by the pens of the most fearful dogs, allowing them to approach him on their own terms. For many of them, this was their first experience of safety and trust, and while the emotional scars would take time to fade, the seeds of hope were being sown. One dog in particular caught Max's attention, a young German Shepherd mix who had been incredibly withdrawn since the rescue. Her name was Lucy, and like many of the other dogs, she had been subjected to horrific abuse. She was emaciated, with patches of fur missing from her coat, and her eyes were empty, devoid of the spark of life they should have had. Max approached her slowly, giving her space, never pushing. He sat a few feet away, his posture relaxed, his gaze soft and reassuring. Lucy watched him from a distance, her body stiff, her ears flat against her head. But Max didn't move. He just sat there, his presence a quiet invitation to trust. For hours, he stayed by her side, offering nothing but peace. Gradually, Lucy's body began to soften. Her eyes, once dull, started to show signs of curiosity. It wasn't long before she cautiously approached Max, her body still trembling. She stopped just short of him, sniffing the air. Max didn't flinch or react. He merely sat, allowing her to come closer when she was ready. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Lucy took a tentative step forward and sniffed Max's paw. It was a small gesture, but it was everything. Max, sensing the fragile moment, slowly reached out and nudged her with his nose. Lucy flinched but didn't pull away. Instead, she sat down beside him, her body still tense, but no longer in fear. For the first time since their rescue, Lucy allowed herself to relax. She leaned into Max slightly, just enough to feel the comfort of his presence. Max, with his unspoken understanding, stayed with her, patient as always. It was the beginning of her healing journey, a journey she couldn't take alone. But with Max and the team by her side, she would take it one step at a time. As more days passed, more dogs began to show signs of recovery. The medical staff worked tirelessly to treat their wounds, and the shelter provided a safe space where they could gradually rebuild their trust in humans. Each dog had a different story, but each one was given the chance to rewrite it. The fear in their eyes began to fade, replaced by a cautious curiosity. Some were still too frightened to interact, but others, like Lucy, began to seek out companionship, not only from Max, but from the humans around them as well. Max's role was crucial in these moments of transformation. He was not just a canine, but a bridge between the darkness of their pasts and the light of their futures. His presence was a comfort, a reminder that trust and kindness could still exist in a world that had been so cruel to them. And as the dogs learned to trust again, Max too learned something valuable. He had become more than just a rescue dog. He had become a symbol of hope, healing, and resilience. The recovery process was slow, and there were setbacks along the way. Some dogs, despite all efforts, couldn't shake the deep trauma of their past. Others took longer to warm up to people, their fear still too great. But the team was committed, and Max remained steadfast in his duty. For him, every wag of a tail, every hesitant step forward, was a victory he had helped create. For every dog that began to show signs of healing, there was a renewed sense of hope. The shelter staff and volunteers worked tirelessly to rehabilitate each dog, addressing not just their physical needs, but their emotional ones as well. Slowly, but surely, the dogs began to change. They started to explore their new world with curiosity instead of fear, to interact with humans not as a threat, but as a source of comfort. Max's work was far from finished. As the days turned into weeks, he continued to guide the recovery efforts, his gentle spirit offering reassurance to the dogs still struggling to trust. The journey ahead would be long, but with each passing day, it became clearer that the dogs rescued from that meat farm were not just survivors. They were fighters. And with Max leading the way, they had a fighting chance at a future filled with love, care, and safety. Weeks passed, and the transformation in the shelter was nothing short of miraculous. The dogs who had once been caged in despair now roamed freely in the open spaces, their once cowed bodies showing signs of recovery. The shelter had become a sanctuary, a place where healing was not just a possibility, but a reality. And in the midst of it all, Max continued to play a pivotal role in their journey, his calm presence a beacon of hope for every dog that had been saved from the nightmare of the Korean meat farm. For some, the journey was swift. Dogs like the pit bull they had rescued early on, with her sad, weary eyes, began to show their true personalities. She started wagging her tail in response to the team's calls and slowly approached humans, seeking affection. Others, like Lucy, the German Shepherd mix who had been so withdrawn, were progressing more slowly. But with Max beside her, and the staff's constant attention, she too had begun to take small steps toward recovery. She would now lay her head gently on the lap of the volunteers who cared for her, a gesture of trust that had once seemed impossible. Despite the overwhelming success of the operation, there were still challenges ahead. The emotional scars of the dogs ran deep. The trauma they had endured wasn't something that could be erased with food, medical care, or kindness alone. Some dogs remained withdrawn, their eyes filled with fear at even the slightest movement or sound. Others would flinch if a hand came too close, their instinct to flee ingrained in their very beings. Max, however, had developed an almost mystical ability to sense when a dog was at its breaking point. He would approach the most traumatized animals, sitting by their sides and offering them his unwavering support. The team had come to rely on him not just as a search and rescue dog, but as a mentor, his steady, compassionate nature helping to bridge the gap between fear and trust. One day, as the shelter staff worked through their routine of feeding and administering medications, Max led them to a quiet corner of the sanctuary. There, curled in a corner of the pen, was a small, trembling dog, one of the last to recover, a young beagle that had remained distant, fearful of any human contact. Her name was Daisy, and her initial days at the shelter had been spent cowering, avoiding any interaction. Max approached her slowly, as he always did, but this time something felt different. Daisy, though wary, didn't retreat as he came closer. Her wide, frightened eyes followed his every move, and for a moment, it seemed as though the world had stopped. She was facing her greatest fear, the fear of trust, the fear of being hurt again. And it was Max who had been chosen to help her take that first step. Tom watched from a distance, holding his breath. He knew how much Daisy had struggled to trust people, how many failed attempts had been made to get close to her. But Max was different. He had been a constant presence through the darkest days of their recovery, and now he seemed to be reaching out to Daisy in a way that no one else could. Max sat at a respectful distance, his body language open, non-threatening. He tilted his head slightly, watching Daisy closely, waiting for her to make the decision to approach him. For what felt like an eternity, Daisy sat still, her body tense. But then, after a long silence, she took a tentative step forward. She sniffed the air, then glanced up at Max, who remained perfectly still. Another step, and then another, until she was standing just a few feet away from him. Tom's heart swelled with pride as he watched the incredible breakthrough unfold. Max had worked his magic again. With quiet patience and infinite grace, he had bridged the gap of fear, helping Daisy take the most important step of her life, the step toward trust. Max didn't move, allowing Daisy the space she needed. Slowly, cautiously, Daisy took another step, and this time, she lowered her head to sniff Max's paw. The air around them seemed to hum with anticipation, the tension palpable. Then, in a beautiful, heart-stopping moment, Daisy nuzzled Max's leg. It was the first time she had shown any sign of affection or comfort toward another being since arriving at the shelter. Max's tail gave a slight wag, and Daisy tentatively responded, her body relaxing just enough to sit down beside him. It was a small gesture, but it marked the beginning of Daisy's true recovery. She had chosen to trust again, and with Max by her side, she would now learn what it meant to live a life free from fear. For Tom and the rest of the team, this moment was nothing short of a triumph. It was proof that with enough time, patience, and love, even the most broken of souls could heal. As they watched Daisy lie down next to Max, resting her head against his flank, they realized that the true power of the rescue wasn't just about saving the dogs. It was about giving them the chance to reclaim their lives and their dignity. Max had shown them all what it meant to be resilient, to fight for what's right, and to offer the greatest gift of all, the gift of hope. And now, with each passing day, the dogs that had once been broken were growing stronger, learning to love again, and preparing for the new lives they would soon begin with families who would cherish them forever. Max had led them through the darkness, and now, as the dogs took their first steps into a brighter future, it was clear that their journey to healing had only just begun. The day had finally arrived. One by one, the dogs that had been rescued from the Korean meat farm were ready for adoption. It had been a long road of recovery, a journey filled with both heartache and triumph. The physical scars had faded, but the emotional scars would always remain. Yet the transformation from traumatized victims to healthy, loving companions was nothing short of extraordinary. Max, who had led them through every step of the journey, was standing at the threshold of their new lives. His mission had been accomplished. For Tom, this was the culmination of a mission he had never expected to become so personal. He had watched as each dog blossomed in their own way, their personalities emerging after months of care and rehabilitation. Some, like the older pit bull, had blossomed into outgoing, affectionate companions, eager to find a home where they would be loved unconditionally. Others, like Lucy, the German Shepherd mix, had become more confident, learning to trust humans and embrace a future filled with possibilities. But there was still Daisy, the beagle who had struggled the most. She had come a long way, but her journey to trusting humans had been the hardest of them all. It wasn't until the last few days that Daisy had truly opened up, and her connection to Max had been a defining factor in her healing. She would follow him around the shelter, seeking comfort in his presence, always a little hesitant but showing small signs of progress. Today, however, there was a sense of calm in her eyes. She was ready for the love she so desperately deserved. The adoption event was held at the shelter, a chance for the public to meet these incredible dogs and offer them the homes they needed to begin anew. The place was abuzz with excitement as families arrived, eager to meet their future pets. There were young children, excited couples, and even older individuals looking for a companion. Each one had come with the hope of finding a dog that would fit into their lives. But they would soon learn that these dogs were not just looking for homes, they were looking for second chances. Max, standing proudly at the center of the room, was the first to be greeted. He had been instrumental in the recovery of each dog, and now he was a hero to everyone present. His gentle eyes scanned the crowd, his tail giving an occasional wag as the families approached him. It was clear he was enjoying the attention, but there was also something deeper in his gaze. He had done what he came to do, and now it was time to pass the torch. As families met the dogs, each one formed an immediate connection. The older pit bull, now playful and loving, found her match in a young couple who had been looking for a dog to bring joy into their home. She approached them cautiously but quickly warmed up, her tail wagging as they offered her treats and affection. It was a beautiful moment, one of many that would unfold throughout the day. Lucy, who had been so timid in the beginning, was adopted by a family with 2 children who immediately fell in love with her gentle demeanor. They had experienced the heartbreak of losing a pet, and Lucy's quiet, reserved nature seemed to resonate with their own healing hearts. She slowly approached them, her once tense body now relaxed in their presence. The bond was instant, but the most heartwarming moment of all came when Daisy, the beagle, was introduced to a couple who had previously adopted rescue dogs. They had seen Daisy's progress and knew she needed a patient, understanding family. Daisy hesitated at first, her body still carrying the weight of her past, but Max was there, guiding her forward. The couple knelt down, offering her a soft voice and a gentle touch. Daisy took a deep breath, her eyes softening, and in a quiet yet profound moment, she walked over to them and gently nuzzled their hands. It was as if she had finally realized that she could trust again, that love could be safe. The couple, overwhelmed with emotion, gently took her into their arms. Daisy, for the first time in her life, seemed at peace. Max watched from a distance, his eyes following Daisy as she was cradled in the arms of her new family. He had done his part. The rest, now, was up to them. By the end of the day, all the dogs had found their forever homes. Some were adopted by first-time pet owners, while others went to families with a deep understanding of the needs of rescue dogs. They all had one thing in common. They would be loved, cared for, and treated with the respect they deserved. It was a new beginning for each of them, a future filled with safety and companionship. For Tom, it was bittersweet. He had watched these dogs suffer and had witnessed their incredible recovery, and now they were moving on to their next chapter. It was a day of triumph, but also a day of letting go. The mission had been a success, and the dogs, with their resilient spirits, were ready to embark on their new lives. Max, standing proudly at Tom's side, looked up at him as if to say, "We did it." His tail wagged slowly, a contented smile on his face. He had given everything to help these dogs, and now, as the sun began to set, he could rest knowing he had fulfilled his purpose. The shelter, once a place of suffering, was now a place of hope and new beginnings. The dogs, no longer victims of cruelty, were now shining examples of resilience and recovery. And with Max at the heart of it all, their stories would continue. Stories of healing, love, and second chances. A truly incredible journey, one that would live on in the hearts of everyone who had been a part of it.